Hello everyone. You could have wasted your time doing anything, but you decided to waste it with me in my review of the fourth main entry in SEGA's Like a Dragon series. A game that is riddled with things I love and things that I absolutely hate. So much that I really can't keep a concrete opinion on this game. And while we're on that topic, I originally pegged this entry as the absolute worst in the series, but following this most recent playthrough, I can't really say that's the case anymore. Do I think it's an absolutely fantastic masterpiece? Oh hell no, most certainly not. But the notion that this game is the bottom of the barrel is hilarious, and I really don't get what made myself think that way. But nevertheless, Like a Dragon 4 is still not without its abundance of issues, which I'll obviously delve into later on, but first, some background info. As many of you may be aware, Like a Dragon 4 was the first game in the series to have several different playable characters. Each of them play their own role in the story before the four of them all come together in the final act. We of course have Kiryu as always, but joining him is Akiyama, a moneylender who's buddy-buddy with some Yakuza. Saejima, an ex-Tojo member who killed 18 men all on his own. And Tanimura, a detective who's driven by vengeance over the murder of his father. Along with having their own personality and motive in the story, they each possess their own unique combat styles that are a reflection of said personalities. So even if the combat did kinda suck in certain aspects, I can at least give the devs some credit for giving these guys a moveset that strongly suits their character. If there's one thing this franchise has been able to accomplish so consistently, it's the ability to translate a character's personality into their fighting style, and this game is definitely not an exception. For instance, Akiyama is a cool rich guy, so of course his fighting style will be geared towards finesse and flashiness. Saejima is a brute and powerhouse, so much of his moveset revolves around slamming enemies that just hit him like a goddamn truck. And then there's the cop Tanimura, whose fighting style mostly focuses on restraining enemies rather than just beating the hell out of them. And of course, concepts such as this are pretty sweet and all, but a good concept can only carry a game so far, especially if the gameplay itself ends up being subpar, which is unfortunately the case for Like a Dragon 4. Judging by that sense alone, you can already tell that I have quite a bit of gripes with this game's combat system, but before I delve into any of them, first I'd like to acknowledge the many quality of life improvements this game makes over its predecessor. I'll try and be nice to the game a bit before I begin ripping it to shreds. It's just more fair that way, you know? And with that being said, the abundance of annoying bullshit that plagued Like a Dragon 3's combat have all but disappeared in this game. Great! No more grinding your way into getting heat mode, no more incessant blocking to deal with, and finally, the damage output is actually pretty decent this time around. So with that in mind, you may think that Like a Dragon 4's combat is marginally superior compared to 3's. It's kinda not, to be honest, funnily enough. I mean, if anything, it's better by like the teensiest little itty bitty microscopic length of my penis bit. Getting back on track, while this game did improve upon many of 3's shortcomings, it simultaneously introduced brand new annoyances and even amplified some that were present in 3. Yeah, don't you just love it when sequels do that? The biggest offender in this case is, by far, the crowd management. You all remember how much I ragged on the crowd combat in 3, talking about how obnoxious it was and everything. So imagine my shock when I say that group battles were handled even more poorly here than in the previous game. Did you think that was even remotely possible? No? Well, sucks to be you, I guess. And it sucks to be me even more, because I'm the one who had to sit through this shit. Yeah. Generally speaking, it does suffer the exact same issues as in 3. Enemies attack arbitrarily, they almost always attack in pairs, resulting in attack chains you can't do a damn thing about. You know the whole ordeal by now. But there are two big things that really made this aspect of the combat even more frustrating than in Like a Dragon 3. Enemy grabs and stun locking are two things that will happen far more often compared to 3, And when I say far more often, I really mean a hell of a lot more often. Like, holy shit, was this game even play tested? There were plenty of instances where I got caught in a series of different attacks where I couldn't do a goddamn thing about it, which resulted in losing quite a bit of my HP. Things like getting grabbed and escaping the grab, only to get grabbed again, wall bounded into a grab, getting grabbed as I'm getting comboed by other enemies, grab, holy fucking shit. The AI does grappling moves so fucking much, and all it does is work in detriment instead of creating a fun challenge. There's that artificial difficulty bullshit I mentioned during my last review, just with a different move. There is no escape from this, please kill me. Getting back to what I said earlier about attack chains, once you get staggered, enemies can jump in and buttfuck you until their heart's content, because there is such a noticeably long period of time before you get to start moving again. Staggering, stun locking, knockdown, all of these things have an absurd amount of recovery frames, and because of this, you can very easily and very frequently have your ass fucked over. And as bitchy as this sounds, it just isn't fair most of the time. It's not. And yeah, just mentioning all this may sound like me spewing bullshit to make up for how bad I am at the game or whatever, but like I said, just take a look at all this footage that further supports my arguments. Do you see all this janky bullshit? Watching it may have you laughing, but actually playing it will surely result in a broken controller, or two. Or, you know, a hole in the wall, or maybe even the police showing up to your doorstep because your neighbors thought you were murdering somebody. And to add insult to injury, some of the characters don't really have any moves or anything to deal with this. Ahem. Speaking of which, I think now would be a good time to take each character and analyze their combat styles individually, going in the same order as they do in the game. I'll obviously get to their stories later on, but for now, I want to keep the topic focused purely on gameplay. And with that being said, Akiyama is an odd case when it comes to his combat style. I say odd because on a basic level, his combat is honestly pretty shallow. Sure, watching him pull off these awesome kicks and triple finishers is neat the first few times around, but after like the second chapter or so, you've basically seen everything there is to see. You can only do the same couple of high-flying kicks so many times before it starts to become repetitive. Anyway, the thing that makes Akiyama's combat so bizarre is that despite everything I just said, he's still the character I had the most fun with by far, beside Kiryu obviously. And that's because of one really big, really hilarious reason. Like a Dragon 4 kept the wall-bounded mechanic introduced in the previous entry, and man oh man can Akiyama exploit the shit out of it. With how fast his attacks are and how fast he can maneuver, it's really not difficult to pull off some absolutely insane combos using this method. No, seriously, if you manage to get an enemy against a corner, you can actually perform infinite combos. There are a plethora of YouTube videos showcasing this too, and it's just beautiful. Fucking chef's kiss. And yeah, I might have talked shit about this wall bound and stuff earlier, but I'm willing to forgive it if it means I can use it to my advantage in ways such as this. Too bad Akiyama and Kiryu are really the only two characters who can exploit the wall bound, and Saejima's and Tanimura's attacks are much too slow to do so. And speaking of which, Former's combat system is perhaps even stranger than Akiyama's, for entirely different reasons as well. Akiyama's an odd case because his base combat gets boring fast, and you basically have to break the game in order to have some fun with it. And Saejima is an odd case because at the beginning of his arc, he is a fucking nightmare to play as. Once you start unlocking some moves, it's basically damn near impossible to die. A maxed out Saejima is nothing short of a tank, very reflective of his character as I mentioned earlier. Not only does the man hit harder than a bag of bricks, but he has soul upgrades which allow him to withstand a variety of attacks without even getting staggered, including guns and knives. For instance, he'll eventually learn a move that allows him to do a combo without having to worry about an enemy breaking it. There's still some things I dislike about his combat even when he's fully upgraded. For instance, his big combo thing has some pretty bad tracking. And I can't say I'm too big a fan of his evasive maneuvers either. all the other characters quickstep, allowing them to swivel around the opponent and hit them from behind. Saejima instead has this weird somersault thing that makes countering feel less smooth and intuitive. But regardless of those two things, much of his late game abilities grant him shit like invincibility frames, making him an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. Dope! Now, how about his gameplay at the very start of the story? It's bad. It's really, really bad. Like, obnoxiously, unbearably, makes you want to shove hot nails in my toenail, then proceed to kick the wall type of bad. But, I don't know, maybe it's not exactly Saejima's fault. Instead, maybe it's the game's fault for giving me such horrendous fucking battles right in the very first chapter, like, oh my good lord, what the fuck kind of crack were you bitches smoking? Saejima is not well equipped enough to take on some full groups of prison guards, some of which carry batons that stunlock you almost every time they hit you. Oh, and did I mention snipers? Yep. During this prison break, you'll eventually make it to the rooftop where guys with sniper rifles and smoke grenades await you, ready to make even the best days an absolutely miserable one. Jesus Christ, I hate this with a passion. It makes me just want to beat the shit out of everybody in my fucking neighborhood. And since you start off in prison, you obviously won't have access to healing items beforehand, so you're kinda just shit out of luck there. You'll find some on the floor, I guess, but it's just not enough. Especially if you're doing a new file on hard, which is what I did at one time. Not during this playthrough, the one I had to get footage for, but an earlier playthrough. Yeah, I did this shit, new game, on hard. And Jesus Christ, it was fucking painful. Don't play this game on hard unless you're doing a new game plus, for the love of God. I hate to pull the artificial difficulty card yet again, but how else would you describe some bullshit like this? Just throwing a bunch of inane bullshit that feels more like an inconvenience instead of a genuinely fun challenge. And if you thought the early game, artificially difficult lawn battles ended with Saejima Story, you would be sorely mistaken. Because not only does Tanimura get a bad one in his first chapter as well, but he gets another one in the following chapter as well. The first one has these stupid fucking oil spill traps and guys who throw knives at you, while the second one completely restricts your moveset so Tanimura can hold on to a goddamn briefcase that has like 3 attacks. Jesus. But you know what? Maybe the parts where I'm not forced to use a briefcase as a weapon are alright. Maybe Tanimura's moveset is actually pretty good. No. Just shut the fuck up. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it anymore. Because Tanimura's combat is just plain awful. It's easily the worst in the game, and maybe even the worst in the franchise. Not even kidding. Unlike Saejima, no amount of upgrades will make his combat decent. You'll eventually learn heat actions for every finisher, which makes everything a bit more bearable, but that still doesn't negate all the other issues with his fighting style. Tanimura has his parry mechanic that could have been really awesome, but it was implemented rather poorly. I will admit that there's a bit more depth to it than just being a regular old parry. You can use it in front of a group of enemies and inflict crowd damage, and you can also use it to wall bound enemies. But that's about where my praise towards mechanic ends, because boy oh boy is everything else about it just abysmal. Now normally you'd expect something like a parry to be a great tool to use when fighting crowds, right? Well, too bad, because Tanimura struggles so badly against crowds. His moves are incredibly slow, and in order to do a parry, you have to be idle. It'd be nice if you could seamlessly parry an enemy attack from behind while already being engaged in combat, but as you could already guess, that does not happen. Instead, since Tanimura's attack animations are so painfully long, you won't be able to parry in time and you'll just have to take damage. So parrying is actually kind of pointless during group fights, and are really only viable to use during solo fights. Hell, Tanimura doesn't even have any tools to help him deal with crowds either. Aside from getting lucky and using the parry to bowl and pin enemies, he's got that spinning chop attack, and that's basically the full extent of his crowd control mechanics. And what do you know? Tanimura has the most scripted battles against crowds in the game. Fuck, even his final boss is a group fight, and let me tell ya, if you thought the Jingu fight in Kiwami was awful, you ain't seen shit yet, and that's all I'ma say regarding that shit. To absolutely no surprise whatsoever, Kiryu has far and away the best combat in this entire game. Matter of fact, I think his gameplay actually kicks ass. And the thing is, his moveset is the exact same as it was in 3. So what exactly makes his combat in this particular game special? Well, it's because unlike in 3, the potential for his moveset can finally be realized thanks to the removal of all those stupid inconveniences weighing everything down. Finally, we get to truly experience what the Dragon of Dojima is capable of, now that we don't have the obnoxious blocking to deal with, and all that other shit of course. We can actually use the arsenal given to us and fuck shit up, instead of being forced to rely on the same small handful of moves, because those are the only ones that work. And to make things even better, Kiryu doesn't even have to grind through those training missions with Komaki in order to acquire these moves either. Matter of fact, a good chunk of his abilities are already unlocked right from the get-go. You could say it's a bit disappointing that it just gives you all these moves practically free of charge, but with how brief Kiryu's arc is, I suppose I can give this a pass. Yeah, I can't really say much of anything beyond that, since I'd just be retreating everything I've already said in previous reviews, so I think I can just leave it at that. Now on to the other gameplay elements of this game. By far the biggest one that comes to mind immediately is that Like a Dragon 4 gave Kamurocho one hell of a makeover. Considering this is the only game in the series set entirely in Kamurocho, aside from the first one obviously, the devs made up for this by adding in a few extra areas. New additions include the underground mall, the rooftops, and finally, the introduction to Little Asia. And all of it sucks ass. Man, they could have added an extra alleyway or two, maybe another park, something like that. Not a completely useless mall that basically serves no purpose outside of the main story. A convoluted maze of connected rooftops that serve no purpose outside of the main story. And an extremely claustrophobic district that serves no purpose outside of the main story. Perhaps you're seeing some sort of pattern here, but in case you haven't, let me make it a little more obvious. All of these areas are completely redundant. Like the underground mall literally has stores that are basically a copy and paste of stores that were already available beforehand. And the other areas don't offer much of anything either, like a fucking parking garage. Who the fuck cares about any of this shit? There are points in the main story where you'll need to travel to these places, and there's some sub-stories that you can find here and there, but that's about as much mileage as you're going to get out of them. No exclusive activities or anything of that sort, just a bunch of new areas that exist for story purposes, and that's about all there is to it. One last gameplay related topic I would like to address before I start covering the story is the atmosphere and general vibe of this game. 4 plays more into this neo-noir aesthetic than any other game in the franchise, and I love it. This franchise has mainly been set in an urban setting since very beginning obviously, but no other game has truly captured the grittiness and coldness of metropolitan Japan than in this game. Hearing this crazy acid jazz blaring while you're running through dark, rainy streets is just a cherry on top when it comes to this game's brilliant noir atmosphere. This game may have plenty of shortcomings, but when it comes to pure immersion into the world that's been created, Like a Dragon 4 excels far better than any other game in the series aside from maybe Zero or the PS2 games. Alright, it is time, finally time, to talk about this game's intriguing story. You may notice how excited I sound to discuss it, which isn't out of the ordinary for my videos, but this particular story is an especially special case because, wow, this story is really something else. Like, it is so batshit insane that it's actually hard to believe most of the time. All the ridiculous plot twists, double crosses, and betrayals that fire off one after another will leave you stunned, jaw agape, wondering how the fuck professional writers could be responsible for such absurdity. These twists got so bad that at some points I genuinely thought it was all a parody of some sort. Like, there was just no fucking way that a full team of experienced writers willfully put the shit in their story and thought everything would be fine and dandy. I'm stalling. Anyway, like I did earlier with my gameplay portion of the review, I will take each of the characters' stories and review them individually. And then I'll get to the good stuff. And trust me, once I reach that point in the video, I will not hold back. I'm gonna ass blast this narrative diarrhea to Kingdom Come, like the Taco Bell septic tank that it is. Alright, I'm gonna be honest with you all. From a narrative standpoint, Akiyama Story is kinda boring. Not much of anything had me excited or gripped, and the whole thing just kinda felt uneventful. Even the final boss was just kinda meh. Some asshole is trashing your club and you gotta go fold his ass. That's the final boss you want to use for a character's arc? Are you kidding me? The only connection the two had was that Minami just so happened to be looking for Akiyama's love interest, and that's really about it. But hey, I can forgive this half-baked storyline, because Akiyama's personality and antics make up for it. His quirkiness, cool attitude, and genuinely funny dialogue turned an iffy story into a near unforgettable one. His cockiness and his constant banter with his enemies never ceased to entertain me, and in some cases, the writing even got a chuckle out of me, and that's quite the feat to accomplish, considering I'm such a soulless husk and never lasted anything. And while the plot is generally pretty much just the most okay thing ever, I will say that it did a good job in establishing the mysteries behind the main story. Everything regarding this mystery woman, the Tojo clan drama, Majima somehow being connected to said woman, this arc really pulled me in and had me anticipating what the following arcs would entail. If only I had known it would eventually turn into an absolute shit show, but I'll get to it. Trust me, I'll get to it. Saejima has, without question, one of the best damn arcs in the entire series. It's easily in the top 5 for me. Gameplay wise, yeah, it's probably the worst one besides Tanimura, but story? Yeah man, that shit is peak. Some of the most memorable and emotionally invested moments in the franchise's history can be found throughout this arc. Everything from Saejima's speech in the Coliseum, to swearing his oath with Hamazaki, to his epic ass showdown with Majima at the end. And by the way, the latter is one of the most fantastic boss fights ever conceived. Brother versus brother. Man who has it all versus man who lost it all. Thirst Trap Twink versus Himbo Bear. It is absolutely Kino. This arc also delves into the idea of regret and pulls it off so well. Certain scenes, most notably Saejima's reunion with his boss Sasai, beautifully illustrates the consequences that come with your actions, no matter how beneficial they might have seemed at the time. Back in 1985, Saejima may have thought that this murder spree would have launched his boss up the ranks, but all it did was result in complete vegetation of his mind, and Saejima getting thrown in jail for 25 years, and Majima getting thrown in a hole for 3 years. Everyone's life got so fucked up, and Sasai especially, cause that dude, he straight up became a zombie. And the scene where Saejima sees what he has become, and he lets those consequences sink in, so good. And this theme is further explored during Saejima's message to Kido, where he explains that you may regret some of the actions you've made in your life, but helping the ones closest to you is something you can never regret. Ain't that awesome? Regret. I'm keeping that in there, I don't even care. But as peak as Saejima's story arc may be, there are two things I kinda disliked about it. The first scene is a very uncomfortable scene that I will not describe to you, but you probably already know what I'm referring to because it involves Haruka. It's such a pointless scene. I don't understand why they kept it in. I don't understand why they didn't remove it for the remaster. Like, you removed a bunch of other shit from the remaster, why not this? And the second thing ties into gameplay, but still has much to do with the story, so I figured it worked here better. With all the cops patrolling the streets, Saejima will have to sneak around them in order to get to the places he needs to go, undetected. Much of Saejima's story is relegated to stealth missions around Kamurocho, which sounds fucking awesome on paper, but they messed it up by making it too linear and having the game tell you where to go at all times. Great. Instead of having the player try and figure out the most optimal way around the cops patrolling Tokyo, they just keep adding waypoints to your map, which really kills the stealthy approach they seemed to be going for. But yeah, aside from those two things, this is an excellent story. But it sucks, because not long after Saejima's arc concludes, the entire story just completely falls apart. I'm getting there. Tanimura is a serviceable enough character on his own. He definitely has the least distinct personality out of the main cast, but I wouldn't say he's bland or anything. Just kinda in the middle, I guess. But I will give Tanimura some credit and say that his whole brand of justice thing was a nice touch. I really gotta give the man props with the way he's willing to square up with the highest of Japanese authorities in order to do the right thing. So in terms of ideals, Tanimura is pretty strongly written. Not quite as good as Kiryu or Saejima, but still pretty solid stuff. But in terms of personality, yeah, I'm afraid he fell a bit short. Anyway, while the character is at least average, the same cannot be said about his story. At all. Remember earlier when I said that there's some really absurd and contrived plot twists? Well, get your ass ready because it's finally time to talk about them. But first, I gotta cover the first 3 chapters of his arc where it, breezes by extremely fucking quick. Chapter 2 has a fairly decent length, but chapters 1 and 3 have like one notable event and that's where it ends. Hell, I don't even think the latter had a scripted fight in it at all. Tanimura and his old friend, Mr. Whoever the fuck, go to the Scandal Graveyard, go back to Kamurocho, and that's basically it. But chapter 4 is essentially where the story completely falls apart because from there onward, the story becomes less of an actual story and more of a montage of ridiculous ideas that fail in every conceivable way. Starting off with the ludicrous reveal that Sugiyushi was never a cop, instead, a Yakuza, going undercover as a cop. Wow, so much for that good cop bad cop dynamic they were building up. I'd elaborate my gripes with this twist further, but I'll save it for later. Trust me, I'll get to all the other ones too, just let me take care of Kiryu's arc first. Earlier I said that Kiryu has undoubtedly the best combat in this entire game, but when it comes to his story, the same thing can almost be said. Saejima's story was only slightly better, but regardless, Kiryu's story was pretty damn good, and ironically so, since the things I loved about Kiryu's story didn't really have to do with Kiryu himself. It's actually Hamazaki that seals the show here. To put things simply, Like a Dragon 4 did what 3 refused to do, by giving Hamazaki some proper character development. On one hand, I would have preferred him to stay a villain, but on the other hand, the redemption arc he goes through is fantastic, and I'm obviously cool with this type of development, as opposed to no development at all. Take notes 3. And honestly, I dig the whole connection to the very first game, and how that stolen yen was intended for the secret super prison. One could argue that this was just a plot device to justify Kiryu's involvement in the story, and honestly, I can kinda see why someone would think that. But, number 1, there are already enough plot devices in this fucking game. More on that in a bit. And number 2, I always get a little jittery whenever events from older titles become relevant again. I don't know, it's just something that's always intrigued me. Anyway, a common misconception I hear about Kiryu is that he didn't need to be in this game. I mean, sure, his actions in this game feel kinda routine. Tojo Clan's in trouble again, and he's gotta beat the shit out of 300 people, you know the drill. Same shit as the other 3 games. But I never really got the feeling that he wasn't integral to the plot, like what some people say apparently. Honestly, if there were a character who really felt shoehorned, it's Daigo. Daigo's character is a massive far cry from his portrayal in 3, and his role as an antagonist is incredibly forced. You mean to tell me that the same guy who refused to sell Kiryu's land numerous times, despite the amount of wealth it would generate, would sell out Majima and become the main villain's lapdog? What? Maybe we could have gotten some more insight on why he made such decisions, but Daigo literally appears in 2 cutscenes prior to the finale, hence my complaint on why he felt so forced as a villain. And great, it's just more undeveloped writing, don't you just love this shit? But man, I will take some underdeveloped writing as opposed to the crock of rancid dog shit that the game's plot twists deliver on our plates. You thought that Teruto revealing himself as some secret Korean mafia man was bad? You ain't seen shit. You thought Joji Kazuma turning out to be a secret CIA twin brother was bad? You ain't seen shit. Because the twist I'm about to tell you is such an oddity that it is beyond human comprehension. If you're completely unaware of what these twists entail, well, strap yourselves in because this is gonna be one hell of a ride. And if you have seen these scenes before, I must apologize for any trauma I may have brought back. And with that being said, y'all remember when Saejima killed 18 dudes all by his lonesome? Yeah, badass shit, right? Well, apparently Saejima didn't actually kill any of those guys. Matter of fact, Saejima's guns were secretly loaded with rubber bullets by Katsuragi and Sugiyuchi, so that the former could kill them himself, and Saejima could take the fall for it. If that in and of itself doesn't sound ridiculous, allow me to further explain why this twist is so dumb. But first, some honesty. I feel like this twist could, and I mean could, have worked. Because when you think about it, twists like this aren't exactly out of the ordinary, and in some cases they did work out alright. But the thing that makes this particular twist so awful is that these characters are fucking retarded. Like, Saejima spent a few moments blasting away at everyone he saw, and yet it never once occurred to him that absolutely no blood aside from his own was present. Even after the carnage where Saejima got a bit of downtime, he still couldn't notice that no one was bleeding. Was he blind or what? Side note, while rubber rounds aren't as lethal as normal ammunition, it can still cause a lot of damage. And this was back in the 80s, when this was a relatively new invention, at least according to the game. So it's not crazy to believe that Saejima could have killed a guy or two, especially considering the point-blank range he shot people from. Getting back on track, Saejima may have been dumb in this scene, but man, he looks like a fucking genius compared to Katsuragi here. But his stupidity here is a special case, because I actually don't even need to explain anything, because the game does a pretty good job of it itself. No, I am not joking. The adjacent cutscene literally points out all the gaping holes in Sugiyuchi and Katsuragi's plan. Most notably, Katsuragi finishing off his men with a clean headshot, while Katsuragi took a shot to a non-vital area, because that totally won't look suspicious at all. Also, why couldn't Katsuragi equip his gun with a suppressor? Honestly, out of all the plot holes in this scene, this might actually be the biggest one. Like, imagine how many people could have heard all the gunfire. And this was shortly after Saejima already left the restaurant, so there's a damn good chance he could have heard Katsuragi's gun. As well as the other citizens, of course. And that's not even considering the residents and cops surrounding the area. More gunshots going off after the mass murderer had left the building? That sounds pretty suspicious, no? God, what an awful plot twist. This shit really gives me a headache with how agonizingly stupid it is. They could have done something pretty interesting here, but of course, they fucked it up by having these villains make the most pathetic of oversights that not even I would make. Jesus, the lack of fucking awareness that these characters had. Jesus, these are supposed to be criminal masterminds. Like, if these are if these are supposed to be like very cunning criminal masterminds, then what the fuck does that make me? Like, seriously, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I literally look like a genius compared to these fucking people. And good lord, it's not even the worst twist in the game. I really wish this were the worst one, but it's about the fourth worst. It's not even the worst. The worst, there's three above it all, and they all happen in the same cutscene. I hate this. I absolutely hate this. All these formulaic and predictable betrayals and switcheroos have absolutely no nuance to them. They are literally nothing but surface-level subversions of expectation that, in some cases, don't even add anything to the plot. Like, RIE suddenly betraying Kido was dumb enough in its own right, but Kido coming back and having the strength to fight Saejima is some bullshit, man. Dude caught a cap in his gut, was left to die on an elevator, and yet, here he is all fine and dandy, like he was scratched by his pet cat or something. And these subversions, oh my fucking god, these are the tackiest, most forced subversions in the whole series. Kido breaks his promise with Kiryu, only to turn around and shoot Kasaragi, only for him to be wearing a bulletproof vest, only for Saejima to threaten him but end up sparing his life. If you thought all that shit was predictable, you ain't seen nothing yet, because what follows is even more predictable, and they try to dress it up as some sort of breathtaking fucking subversion. Like none of the players were expecting, even though anyone with half a brain cell saw this shit coming from a mile away. Also, remember when Like a Dragon 3 pulled the shit where all the characters flat out ignore the gun next to the villain, resulting in the very much avoidable death of a side character? Does this happen again here? Oh, you bet your sweet little twink ass it does. I should be angry over the fact that this plot device was used for the fourth fucking time in a row, but honestly, the sheer unintentional humor of the scene makes up for it. The death of Yasuko Saejima might actually be the funniest death scene in a video game that I have ever seen. She gets shot in the back to protect her brother, yeah, so heroic. But then Yasuko pulls out the gun Tanimura gave to her and slowly approaches a cowering Kasaragi who misses every single shot, yet he was able to cleanly hit a moving target directly in the back. Either Kasaragi somehow went blind or Yasuko turned into Fortune from Metal Gear Solid 2. Anyway, Yasuko says some cheesy inspirational bullshit, blah blah blah, then pops Kasaragi in the head because for some reason it took the characters this long to realize that's the ideal place to shoot someone. But then suddenly, the writers remember that Yasuko got shot, then she dies. Aw, how sad, but not really. Great writing, everyone. High fives all around. Let's go to TGI Fridays to celebrate. Meals on me. Jesus Christ. Anyway, there are a few other plot holes in the story, like how the hell were Kido and Kasaragi able to kidnap Saejima when the dude is not only Kiryu's equal, but he also had the assistance of all those Coliseum fighters? Like, what? How the hell was he captured so easily? This dude can fight a fucking bear. But no, ropes. That's the real danger. Also, how in God's name was Majima and Sasai over to West Park when he was literally getting tortured in the hole at the time? This plot hole could have been fixed with Zero, but since Sasai is barely even mentioned in that game, let alone not even appearing, I just have to assume that maybe someone else brought him over, not Majima. Jesus Christ. So I've said some pretty nasty shit about this game's story so far. I spent an ungodly amount of time bashing it front to back, and yet, all the issues I've mentioned aren't even the worst thing about this story. They actually pale in comparison to what I consider to be this story's worst element. But it's not a plot twist, it's not a contrivance, it's not any specific piece of dialogue, it's actually a character. Yasuko Saejima, to be exact. Fuck me, man. Yasuko is without a doubt the worst character in this entire franchise, bar none. Main character, at least. She just has so many irredeemable qualities, and they all combine in a way that makes her exceptionally insufferable. She has a severe lack of personality, very little to no common sense. Gets the other characters involved in situations that could have been avoided easily. She talks so fucking slow, and her performance is generally tedious, and most of all, she is literally nothing more than a plot device made to bring our four protagonists together. And she is just so fucking stupid. I get that making mistakes and learning from them is a key moral of this franchise, but this character decided to say fuck it and continue to act like a fucking idiot. It got so bad that she actually died from it. Yep, she died because of her own stupidity. Kiryu leaves Yasuko with Date, and guess what she did? She drugged his ass so she could run off and get herself killed. Don't want to get into specifics because this video has been long enough as it is, but let me just say that Tanimura gave Yasuko a gun to protect herself, and not once during that whole mishap with Katsuragi did she decide to use it. There's being stupid, and then there's doubling down on it when you can't even seem to think logically. Literal helium tank for a brain. And not only is she a total moron, but she's a bit of a cunt too. During Tanimura's portion of the game, he begs Yasuko for her assistance in finding out who his father's murderer is. She scolds him, calls him selfish, and puts her total disregard for self-awareness on display. Bitch, you literally killed like 3 people just to get closer to your brother, despite being employed under someone that you don't even trust? Fucking hell. You know what, I'm done. I could go further into detail in describing how dog shit this character is and how kind of misogynistic she is. But I really should be wrapping up this video by now. It has gone on for way too long at this point. And I haven't even mentioned the goddamn ending to this game yet. If you thought anything else regarding the plot wasn't crackheaded enough already, if what I'm about to tell you doesn't result in a concussion via facepalm, then you were just in denial of how shit the writing is. Since our 4 heroes aren't quite aware of who the true bad guy is just yet, they devise a plan to lure in the mystery villain. Alright, so what's the big plan, guys? What sort of master bait are you gonna use to drag the shitmeister into your trap? Well, Akiyama's gonna take the 100 billion yen that was once stolen from him, heave it on top of the Millennium Tower, and wait for the baddies to come like ants to an old ham sandwich. You're joking, right? You're joking. Please tell me that this is some elaborate parody and I just haven't caught on yet, because I refuse to believe the professional writers would resort to such a lazy-ass, hashed, rushed, stupid-ass ending. Like, did any of these villains take a moment to realize, hey, this could be a trap? Like, could it have been any more obvious? But who cares? None of that shit matters now because it's epic climax time, bitch. Yeah! Time for our heroes and their rivals to rip off their clothes and beat the shit out of each other. God, these bosses make no sense. Okay, Tanimura vs. Munakata is a good pick, even though I would have preferred if that old goofy guy was the mastermind behind everything instead of this stock bad guy who was literally never mentioned or hinted at until the latter half of the game. Actually, not even latter half, like the last 3/4 of the game is when the first time this guy appears. Not even joking. Anyway, on to the others. Akiyama facing RE is fine, but I think Kido would have been the better choice when you consider how close the two became throughout Akiyama's story, and especially when you consider the fact that Kido essentially spat on Akiyama and betrayed his trust by stealing the money he worked so hard to earn. Saejima vs. Kido. Yeah, no, I'm really not feeling this. This is a pretty notorious pick, but yeah, there's a reason why people think it sucks. They might have interacted here and there, but as far as their relationship is concerned, these two are basically just acquaintances, nothing more. Anyway, Kiryu vs. Daigo is perhaps the dumbest one of them all, which is funny, because it's probably my favorite one from a gameplay perspective. RA and Kido were hilariously pathetic and Munakata is stuff in nightmares, so by default alone, Daigo's boss is the best from a gameplay standpoint. Actually, I should be nicer, because Daigo's fight is actually pretty good. Daigo does get that stupid parry attack towards the end of the fight, but other than that, pretty solid fight, pretty peak stuff. Anyway, back to the story stuff. Aside from one fucky wucky, Daigo really didn't do anything in the story, so his presence as a final boss is just... no. It makes no fucking sense. And besides, did Kiryu and Daigo really need to settle this by fighting? This is such an artificial conflict, they literally could have sorted this shit out by talking. Obviously it's not as fun as a boss fight, but at least it's more plausible. Also, if the previous chapter was anything to go by, Kiryu's final boss should have been RAE. They were baiting, and I mean baiting, a fight between these two, only for it to never even happen. Bruh. If it were up to me, I would have had Kiryu vs RAE, Akiyama vs Kido, Saejima vs Katsuragi, and Tanimura vs Hisai. Yes, I know that two of these characters were already dead by then, but I could do a quick rewrite that would make these boss fights possible. Maybe that could be my next big writing project. So anyway, Like a Dragon 4 may not be the worst game in the franchise, and despite my negativity towards it, I still think the game is pretty solid overall. Sure, the combat sucks for Tanimura and early game Saejima, but Akiyama's alright, and Kiryu is honestly really good. And hell, a decently leveled up Saejima is great too. And while the story isn't very good, I must admit, it still does have some of my favorite moments from not only the franchise's history, but in gaming as a whole. To put it in shorter terms, Like a Dragon 4 is a pretty messy game, but with plenty of positive aspects that keep the game from becoming terrible. So lots of stuff to hate, albeit lots of stuff to love, which makes for an overall pretty average experience. I'm feeling a 6 out of 10 on Like a Dragon 4. See you bitches later.